Hey guys, welcome to the Lunge Lift podcast. Today we've got a great episode in store for you. It's a big question that I don't think gets the analysis that it deserves. Is meat bad for you? I think notionally we all see the benefits of fruit and vegetables, and vegetarian and vegan diets kind of get presented as better and healthier for you. But something we don't often explore is the benefit of eating meat and the nuance behind what meats might be good for you, what meats might be bad for you, and what the research actually says. So we've brought back a good old friend of the show, Liam from PH Nutrition, as our expert nutritionist to dig into the research and really tell us what it tells us from a as close to a factual basis as possible, and exploring both sides of the argument as to whether meat is good or bad for you. But before we get into it, as always, a thank you to our show sponsors, The Training Stimulus. Please visit thetrainingstimulus.com if you're interested in learning more about movement mechanics. Wit Fitness, please visit wit-fitness.com and use discount code LL15 to get 15% off your purchase. And Hydro, please use discount code LL20 to get 20% off your blood flow restriction apparel. Right, let's get into it. Liam, welcome back to the show. How are you, mate?
I'm very well, lads. Thanks for having me back. I think
Pleasure.
it's my hat trick. Is it my hat trick? I'm on my hat trick.
As a minimum.
Yeah.
Is it your third or fourth?
Don't know.
So you've been on a few times. You're a welcomed regular.
Yeah, good. No, I'm looking forward to it, lads. Thanks so much.
So the big topic, the only man for the job, we're going to get right into it. Is meat bad for you?
Right. Short answer, no, it's not. Mm-hmm. Long answer, look, there's a ton of nuance around this, and look, the real key thing that we need to lay the foundations is there's a lot of context here with meat, and I think that's where meat is a blanket term. It incorporates lots of different products, and what we're hopefully going to do today is kind of break that down into some of the research. And give people a little bit of direction, and actually what does some of the science say, but also practically, what can we do, and why do certain people feel meat is bad? Why do people react, better on meat, worse on meat? So I think that's where we need to really kind of, start to be like, look, there's a lot of nuance, and we really need to understand that context is key.
Perfect. Thank you. So, yes, I think for me, this is something that I've wanted to dig into with you for a really long time, because it's notionally something that gets pushed sometimes like indirectly, but sometimes directly as a message that the vegan option is the healthy option, or that the vegetarian option is the healthy option. And it's never really been fully justified in my eyes. So let's start with some of those definitions, I guess. Like, for most people, we think of meat as any animal flesh. Is that how you would define it as well?
Yeah, absolutely. But what often that is correct, but often what people think is meat is just red meat.
Yeah.
And so when you go, oh, meat's bad for you, they're thinking red meat, and they're potentially thinking either kind of like beef, or they're thinking processed meat. So when we talk about processed and unprocessed, like what we're talking about unprocessed is like, your steak and lamb and beef, and then when we're thinking about processed, it's more when we're kind of cured meats, or it's been manufactured in some way. So then we're looking at sausages and bacon and cured meats, and and things like this. So we really need to understand that there's a bit of a difference between that, and I think that's where probably the first thing we need to talk about is processed between unprocessed meat. There's a big difference in the research, and I think when it's not plant-based people pointing the finger. Everybody that says, "Oh, meat's bad," or meat causes certain issues, cancer, or has health implications. What the research is, there's a big divide between processed and unprocessed, and processed is the one that we really need to be aware of. So that's the kind of key thing. In some of this, and I think why kind of plant-based has been so popularized and the kind of meat has been demonized a little bit is that there is a lot of research out there to say that the consumption of meat, unprocessed and processed, does increase all cause mortality, does increase cancer risk, so or cardiovascular disease, such as prostate cancer and colorectal cancer and stuff like this. What there's a big increase in terms of when you consume processed to unprocessed. So regardless of your vegetable intake, if we just focus on meat, like processed meat, there's a that there is an increase when you consume over 50 grams. So for context here, a high consumption is over 200 grams, and what we would call like a mean intake is like 50 to 100 grams a day.
Is that
meat
portion of how much the meat weighs, or the amount of protein it contains, or supposedly contains?
No, so the portion of meat.
50 grams.
Yeah,
that's tiny.
No, I know. So there's one study, and again, we'll put all of these studies in here, and we'll break them down for people. There's one, huge studies, unprocessed meat of 100 grams a day, so unprocessed of 100 grams. So it's not that much, right? There's an increase of 11% of kind of stroke, 15% of cardiovascular mortality, 17% colorectal, and 19% for prostate. That's 100 grams just a day. Processed meat, it's only 50 grams. Then it's a significant increase for most of the diseases in this study, and that was like 4% for prostate, and 18% for colorectal, and 19% for pancreatic, and 24% for cardiovascular. So that's a small amount for 50%, and that's for processed meat. So
is this on trained individuals? Or is this just on who is this study done? And do you know?
This was 30,000 people.
Oh, just okay.
It wasn't trained or trained.
Right,
it wasn't
okay.
female. It's complete split.
Nice.
And so most of these studies that we're going to be talking about today, and then are huge population groups. What I didn't want to do is just be like, oh, there was 10 people that and they did this study on, and they had found this. Like these are real big studies. And I think that's the key thing. Number one point is lowering or restricting the intake of processed meat is beneficial for your health. The more processed meat that you eat, the higher risk of all-cause mortality and certain cancers. So that is definitely where people that are advocating plant-based diet or removal of meat from a diet, that is definitely something that if you do, can help your health.
Great. Just to get cleaner on the definition of processed meat, where's the line in? Obviously, I think people see big cuts of meat straight off the animal. That's unprocessed. But for stuff like mince, is that processed when it's been altered in some way, or
bacon,
does it have to
sausages.
be? Yeah, well, bacon and sausages, I think most people would class as processed, right? Because they've been cured in some way.
Yeah. So there isn't a clear line. There's a bit of a sliding scale here. So mince is classed as unprocessed because it's not added. There's not nitrates in it. There's not cured. It's not salted. It's not obviously there's different levels as well of fat content. So again, it's really challenging to put everything into a clear category. So we're talking like ham. So like there you could have like some of the ham that you get in the supermarket packets, it barely passes ham. Like
the teddy bear hams.
The teddy bear hams. So then you're saying, well, ham, where does that? And there's a sliding scale in terms of that. So it's really challenging, and this is where there's obviously always going to be debate, and this is hopefully trying for us to kind of guide people in the right direction and be like, look, the closer to nature it is, the better. So like if it is mince, then obviously that's slightly less. It's slightly less processed than bacon and sausages, but it's also more processed than like a steak. So you want to be edging towards the things that are closer to nature.
I guess what's also an interesting thought there is, even though mince may not be, say, processed, also the amount that you can eat compared to say a steak. So if you're having 500 grams
Yeah.
of steak compared to 500 grams of mince, you don't get me wrong, you'd be full after both, but to actually get through that much steak would probably take a lot longer than to get that much mince. So I know myself, clients have gone through, you're low on your protein, right, bang, here's a pack of mince, and that sorts you out for the day. But you
Yeah.
also know how much discomfort you get afterwards and stuff like that, because it's just that bolus amount of protein just smashing you down. So I guess, like when you say there, the closer to nature, because the more, if we was to say have this animal and take it apart, is in like that whole process is you're not going to then struggle, because you're only going to be
Yeah.
able to eat what you can rather than overeating, which is a lot of this, I guess, comes down to as well. There's
Yeah.
a lot of that.
100%, Rob. You're absolutely right. Like the devil is in the dose, as well with this. Like, there's some, in a couple of these studies, as the serving size increases, so does the mortality risk. So, again, another study showed that a higher consumption of ultra processed foods, over 4 servings a day, and I'm going to go into what this study actually classed as ultra processed food was. Every extra serving was um, increased 18% of your all-cause mortality by every single serving. Okay, now this is where we're going to bring vegan and vegetarian into this. So this isn't just processed meat. So it can include chorizo and salami and sausages and and all of this, but it also included stuff like chips and cereals and pizza
Right.
and pre-prepared pies and margarine and cookies and muffins and donuts and stuff, which are all vegan,
Yeah.
or all can be vegan or vegetarian. So like these sugary beverages and fruit juices and stuff like this, like again, this study will lay out all of these, and the more that you increase your intake of these ultra processed foods, the more you're increasing risk. So for me, this is where we need to also put a bit of a line in the sand to be like, look, a vegan diet does help. Like a plant-based diet does help to reduce your risk of certain cancers, certain cardiovascular disease by 7 to 10% per 10% increase in fiber, and that's the key. So it's the increase in fiber that is associated with a decreased risk in all-cause mortality. Now, there's studies that show when you eat meat alongside eating fruits and vegetables, then that risk is massively decreased. Okay, so that's what we have to understand. The problem is, as by association, the people that eat higher amount of meat are more likely to have lifestyle factors such as smoking, drinking, a low intake of fruits and vegetables. So the problem is that that's where
Yeah.
Can't separate it out.
that's where you can't separate it out. So if you increase, if you have a high intake of meat, if you increased your fiber intake as well, this decreases your risk factors as well. So that's where plant-based diets obviously naturally higher in fiber. So this is where, obviously, if you're eating that more consistently, because you don't have a choice, this is the only foods that you can build your diet around. Naturally, your fiber intake's higher, and obviously there's other things in a plant-based diet beyond the fiber that are going to help: antioxidants, phytochemicals, certain nutrients. But it's the fiber that's the real key factor. So if you do have a high intake of meat, definitely start to be thinking about, right, what is my vegetable and fruit and fiber intake, and that's the key thing.
Yeah, I
Can
think.
we? Can
Oh,
we?
go on. I was going
Can,
one thing I just wanted to say was I think it was quite key there that you differentiate between vegan and plant based, because obviously
Yeah,
vegan there's a lot more ethical. There's other like products, whereas plant based is that. Just like how now there's a lot more of say meat based diet and stuff like that. There's people are now, rather than giving it such a brand name like vegan, it is. There's so many highly processed foods within a vegan diet, but within a plant based diet, it's
yeah.
very different.
Yeah, I actually tried to find some studies on. So when you Google like vegan diets and all cause mortality or cancer risk or CVD, it is really hard to find anything done on like processed vegan
yeah.
foods. So now the rise of the amount of plant-based alternatives is great, but it's also potentially there's a lot of chemicals and things in there that we don't have long amount of kind of data or people kind of studying this for an extended period of time, like we do with meat. Interestingly, some of the studies were saying an intake of a healthy vegan diet, bit of a blanket term, but that was the title. So I think that or maybe a whole food plant-based diet. So you're not having a high intake of these plant-based alternatives with 50 ingredients in them just for a sausage, where there isn't much research. Well, I couldn't find any. So if anyone does have any, then please point it to me, because I couldn't find anything to do with just a high intake of that. That would be a really interesting study I would like to look at. Having like a potentially like fiber or vegetable intake kind of matched, and then having a high intake of meat and a high intake of like plant-based alternatives.
Yeah.
Then
So
seeing the risk, but I don't think that obviously the timescale hasn't there. But that would be interesting.
Yeah.
So one thing I think we need to talk about a little bit is just making clear the limitations of scientific research, especially as pertains to nutrition, and the difference between correlation and causation. Because I think what we're sort of alluding to there is there's a correlation between mortality and meat consumption. Like the more meat you eat, the more likely you are to die. But when you add in fiber, then that relationship changes. So it's like we're looking at 30,000 people. First of all, we need to understand how that information is collected and how accurate we can rely on it being, if it's just them making a food diary or whatever. But secondly, just because there's a correlation, it doesn't mean that the thing that we're tracking, i.e., meat consumption, is definitely the reason they have died. And I think that's a perfect illustration there of when you add in the fiber, it neutralizes the relationship. So, Liam, could you talk us through sort of how these studies are performed and what the limitations on the logical conclusions we can draw from them are? Because it isn't as clear cut as, meat goes up, meat consumption or processed meat consumption goes up, therefore people die, unless we have a really clear causative mechanism. There's a limitation on how certain that relationship is. Can you talk to that, please?
Like you're absolutely right. Like and this is where I think people in the scientific community would point fingers at things like game changers and these things that like just kind of take elements of a research study and then and kind of dramatize it and popularize it, and actually you need to look at, like you say, the bigger picture. A lot of these studies are done like on vast amounts of people with questionnaires or historical data, or like the World Health Organization done one in 2015, and they're using so it's not like a study where you put a study in and then you track that over a period of time. A lot of it is done on historical data and questionnaires and feedbacks and trends and stuff like this. So it's like you say, it's almost impossible to be able to then take into account every single factor. It's not in a lab. It's not like, right, we're taking 20 people into a lab and we're controlling all other external elements. We're controlling their diet, we're controlling their lifestyle, we're controlling their food, exercise, everything. So it's really hard. They do a very good job of trying to, to kind of, weed out all of these other, external elements, but it's almost impossible to do. So what we need to do is to weed through this, and then, like you say, to try to simplify some of the conclusions of these, to say there's a common theme with processed foods, there's a common theme with processed meats, there's a common theme that if you increase your fiber intake, it's going to lower your risk. So we can't just say, oh, just because you ate processed foods, that means you're going to increase your all-cause mortality. Like, we don't eat single foods, like, and that's something that I think people then go, oh well, I eat red meat and it increases this. Well, no, because I don't know, apart from the carnivore diet, and probably done well to get into this podcast this long without talking about that, but very rarely people eat just meat, or very rarely people eat just broccoli. Do you know what I mean? There's other things involved. So this is where it's impossible to, when you've got such a big sample size, to regulate everybody's diet. So you've got to be trying to derive these conclusions from it. And I think what we want to try to do for every listener is not to bamboozle them with all of this, is try and derive something out of it and be like, look, actually, across of them all, this is what the kind of key take home points are.
Yeah.
It's challenging. Reading scientific literature is challenging, and especially when you're talking about a topic so complex as this.
Exactly. I think the thing that sort of brings it to life is the classic challenge to anti-meat studies is if somebody eats a lot of processed meat, they're probably eating it in conjunction with a lot of other shit. So they're having a meal at McDonald's. Sure, there's some really shit processed meat in the burger, but the bun is also garbage. They're probably having a Coke. They're probably having a large fries with that as well, maybe having a McFlurry afterwards. So they die earlier than their vegetarian mate. But which part of that diet was responsible for their early death? And we can't be sure. Like, we can't be sure from these mass studies where somebody is doing a retrospective diary of what they think they ate 10 years ago, for example, and that we just need to acknowledge that that is a limitation on how certain we can be about conclusions.
Well, that's exactly, mate. That's what I was saying. Like, it's been proven that if you eat a higher intake of meat, then you're more than likely to smoke, to drink more, to exercise less. So if you're plant-based, you're probably more likely to exercise. You're more likely to have a better lifestyle in terms of helping you with managing stress, with managing everything else, because you've naturally self-selected. So again, like you say, that's a correlation with eating meat. Now, not everybody does that. Not everybody that's a meat eater has these lifestyle choices. However, on the whole, when you have such a large sample size, then yes, this is the case. What we want to do is say to people, look, it's not bad, but you need to do this. And if you are plant-based, it's not the magical bullet to make you live forever. You can eat really poorly. You can go to McDonald's and you can eat a large fries and all of this and whatever, and it is highly processed, highly inflammatory and deep fried, and it's low in protein. So if you did that, you would probably be at a higher risk than someone that ate a nice fresh steak.
Do you know?
And loads of veg with it. Yeah.
Do you know?
Exactly.
One thing that I find really interesting though is because it's still early doors, but the data will show later now that places like McDonald's have like the McPlant and all these things, and now there's options for vegans, there's now options for vegetarians, whereas before there wasn't, because this is now so those vegans and vegetarians and plant-based whatever that didn't go into McDonald's because they could only have the chips, now they can have the burger, the chips and the Diet Coke. And you know what I mean? And they think, okay, cool, I'm being following my plant-based or whatever. And I think that's going to show in like, say, 10, 20 years time. Because at the end of the day, this, as you mentioned there, that highly processed food that is going to cause more inflammation, is going to cause more, risks to other things that you're going to get. We don't know that yet. Because these Beyond Meats and all these things are so early doors, I mean, my missus was a vegetarian, so she ate fish basically, so that was as far as she would go. But she had the choice when she was a little kid. Her dad was a butcher. They were both meat eaters. They went vegetarian, owned a health shop, and they went vegetarian for whatever reason. He went back to eating meat because he started to notice some diabetes issues, like type 2, one that you can control. Cleared that, intermittent fasting, some meat, sorts himself right out. Hannah started eating meat probably around 17. So we've been together for about a year and a bit at that point. And from there, all these kind of underlying health things that were nothing major, but health things that she had started to clear up, felt better, felt more energetic and stuff. So this is all just anecdotal. Like, this is obviously not proper, but it's just interesting. But compare that to her sister, who was a meat eater from birth. Difference in size, difference in there were clear differences between them, and they're sisters. So you can see two people brought up, and I remember eating the Linda McCartney pies, the corn sausages, and all these things. I used to go there, and I'd eat them, and I mean they're a good alternative. They really are. But when you do take that step back and think, cool, that process of that they've been through. Don't get me wrong, compared it to like a burger and stuff like that. It's gone through that same process. But
the thought you just made me have in your earlier point about having a vegetarian McDonald's is, what would be a really cool documentary would be a mashup of Supersize Me and Game Changers. So if
Yeah.
Yeah,
somebody
yeah,
did
yeah,
a month of vegetarian or vegan fast food, what would happen to their health?
Yeah.
Because I think we all
yeah,
know that they would still, like, I don't know how bad that guy got in Supersize Me, but it's pretty bad. And I'd like
yeah,
to see how much better off he would be if he did the vegan options at McDonald's, because you can still eat
yeah,
vegan at McDonald's, right? But
Mm.
as
yeah,
long as you have to eat 3 meals a day from McDonald's that's vegan,
yeah,
you'd still be in terrible health after a month. And
yeah.
we all know that. So that's a clear piece of evidence that it's not as simple as vegetarian is healthy.
No, it's not, and I think that's why now it's coming into some of the studies are labeling it healthy vegetarian diet, healthy vegan diet, or whole food plant-based diet. So they
Mm,
don't have any alternatives. So yeah, you're including more beans and pulses and whatever, rather than these highly processed alternatives again, which we don't have long-term data on. So
yeah.
that is something that you see, but that would be a cool thing. I don't know if I won't be volunteering for that, but
No, definitely not.
um,
No.
but
For
yeah,
multiple
one
reasons.
thing before actually, Rob, I'll come on to into
Yeah.
your point in a moment. What kind of benefits of meat, but one thing that we kind of skipped over was, we're talking about red meat and processed meat, but
Mm.
actually I did some research on white meat, because obviously poultry and
Yeah.
it doesn't really get talked about, even though we eat it a lot, and actually one of the studies found that it was one of the first studies, and again we'll link to this, and it was white meat and all cause mortality, and actually there's an inverse association between white meat consumption and all cause mortality, and a
Wow.
neutral association with CV mortality. And it really highlights between differentiating between meat types, um, and so like actually including white meat was beneficial.
What?
So that's
Um,
the more white meat you eat, the longer you live.
yeah,
Okay, that's what
obviously,
Liam Holmes, a pediatrician, is
obviously,
saying.
there's look,
Just
lads, context. What did I
yeah,
say?
Hang on, I'm just going to
Context.
go grab a piece of chicken.
yeah.
The devil's in the
Just
dose.
quickly on that, just like, I want to stay on here though. So does that mean when you say white meat? Because obviously chicken breast, chicken thigh, so they're more fat. But even like a chicken thigh compared to say a ribeye, the fat content again. So then does it actually go a bit more towards how much fat is in that meat? Compared to that, because obviously, as you know, white meat generally, even the fatty ones, is
Is
quite a lot
leaner.
leaner.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they didn't go in and break that down again. Like you'd have to do.
Yeah.
There's an infinite amount of studies if you're going to go down that route. Like 5% mince, 10% mince, 15% mince,
Yeah.
20%. Like,
No, no.
you can do anything, but it highlights that look, meat isn't bad for you. It's just we need to put some context on it. Now, the thing is for me is that this is a big issue, is that the quality of the meat. Like, I think that has a huge bearing, and it's really, really hard to do a study on that. So, like, for example, if you had a white meat that was raised and slaughtered in, I don't know, factory farmed in 5 days, compared to something that was free range and corn fed and organic and whatever, is that quality of meat going to help you if you ate that compared to one that's really, like pumped full of hormones and poor quality feed? It's really, again, that there's always that kind of argument. And for me, look, it's impossible. It's impossible to say to people, like, we don't have the research on every single kind of nuance.
Mm,
But obviously, what you got to do is you got to try to buy the best that your budget allows. You got to eat the best quality, as close to nature as possible. And that's the only advice that I think that I would give my clients, and that we can confidently say, like, that's what we should be doing.
yeah,
Um, I think, like you say, it's hard because the quality meat has huge benefits. Like, was it your father-in-law
Yeah.
added meat back in, and
Yeah.
so the diabetes kind of side of things. Look, potentially, I don't know what his dietary history was, but he could be eating a high sugar, high carb, high fat diet because he's removing meat, which has a higher amount of protein. So he might have struggled to get protein into his diet without meat. So therefore, higher consumption of carbohydrates, adds meat back in, naturally eats a little bit lower carbohydrate, into, did some fasting, blah blah blah, helps to manage some of the symptoms he has. But meat has, like, creatine and carnitine and choline and B12 and iron, and certain omega threes, and broad, every single amino acid
Yeah.
like that we need. So it these types of things, meat is really, really nutrient dense. We're talking about like vegetables being nutrient dense. We're talking about beans being nutrient dense. Meat is really, really nutrient dense. So, that's where no, meat isn't bad for you. So again, it has huge benefits from a kind of nutrient and vitamin and mineral point of view.
Especially
Yeah, I
when you
think
start then going into like the organ meats as well, because
exactly.
I've
Yeah.
definitely
Definitely.
been adding some of them more into my diet recently. Hannah's not the biggest fan of when I cook liver, but I've been enjoying it. Like if Hannah's having a meal, I'm then trying to add in some liver and stuff because I'm intrigued. I've also got some, like the desiccated stuff, like the fro diet as
Yeah.
capsules, because it is sometimes a bit questionable about the actual quality of it, stuff like that. And I'm trying it because I think, do you know what? I like to try and eat a bit more than muscle meat. And that is purely because of what I've seen online. And it just made me think outside the box of just your normal steaks and your chicken breasts and stuff. And I was like, do you know what? Let me try some of these other things, just like I try any other meat. So,
I think one
Yeah.
point that the carnivore population make quite well is that if you think about what your body needs, a lot of that is in an animal's body because they're very
Yeah.
similar to us. So if you eat nose to tail, the chances of you actually consuming the nutrients that constitute your body are much higher than if you eat plants, which have a lot less in common with us. And obviously, if you take that to its logical conclusion, we should all be cannibals, but that's not what I'm saying. It just means that there is a lot of
yeah.
nutrition to be derived from eating a broad
I
spectrum
agree.
of animal
I
products.
agree. But you can't get fiber from an animal. So that's where I go against it. And I know me and Ash, we've had a conversation about are vegetables bad for you,
Yeah.
and with the carnivore diet, and a lot of them would go, well, yeah, my digestive issues have improved, and all of this, and that's what a lot of people say about the carnivore diet, and I'm like, okay, yeah, like cool, but what you're often doing with digestive issues is you're removing a lot of food groups and a lot of different foods. So it might not be that cauliflower causes, or vegetables cause it. It might have been that actually it's bread and you've removed that, or it might be that it's peppers and you've removed that. And actually, if you ate everything else apart from that one thing that caused that little bit of bloating on
Mm,
digestion, then it's there. Or it's that it's really challenging to overconsume protein. So your portion sizes are lower. So therefore your digestive system doesn't get overloaded by having 1,500 calories from a pizza, which has high carb, high fat, loads of processed meat. And, for me, I think there's, again, a lot of context around that, why people feel these improvements in terms of other areas like digestion when they follow like a carnivore diet or something like this.
mm,
So again, for
Yeah.
me, there's no long-term studies on it. So
yeah.
I
Yeah.
think people feel really good in the short term, and I'd like
Yeah.
to see them function in 4 or
That
5 years' time,
your
and
gut
I'd like to see their
diversity.
bank balance. I'd like to see their bank balance after 4 years.
That's the thing. Your
I'm
gut
like,
diversity as
Jesus.
well. You take away all the vegetables and everything else like that, and you are just sticking to meat. Your microbiome will become, as you said, go to essentially a very few number of quality in there. So you want to think if you're not having all the other stuff. I mean, I think a lot. I heard a really good saying. Someone was kind of talking on the fence about it, and they was just like, the problem is people think that carnivore or say vegan and stuff is the magic bullet. But just like you said at the start of this podcast, it's that normally that bit in the middle, because if you're just going straight down the carnivore, why are you doing that in the first place? Why do you suddenly want to restrict yourself to just meat? If it's because you have an autoimmune issue or something like that, fair enough, then that might be an option for you. And then you try to bring stuff back in. It doesn't mean you stay on this only meat diet or only plant-based diet. And it's that thing I think of coming back to having a diverse diet and keeping as much in as you can and that you can tolerate and feel good and function well on.
So I think a useful way to sort of spin on that is we were talking about the difference in correlation and causation. And one thing I liked that you said earlier, Liam, was about adding fiber to a meat-based diet neutralizes the mortality risk. And I think of that as like a practical principle, which is actually causative. Like we have some research to understand why fiber might be beneficial, and we have some research to understand why meat might be beneficial. Are there any more principles like that where we can get a better understanding of why, like for example, why processed meat is bad for you? Like what might be the causative reasons for why processed meat kills you sooner?
Often it's due to higher levels of like carcinogen, so potentially it's nitrates, in the process of making it into its form. Um, there's lots of kind of mechanisms underlying bread and processed meat, including I'm going to say all of these different compounds, but it's like heterocyclic amines and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons like PAH. If you'll see these and like mutagenic compounds that are formed during high temperature cooking or
Yeah.
processing, so such as frying and grilling and barbecuing and processing like curing and smoking, they're the mechanisms that are causing
Yeah.
cancerous cells. Okay, so that's the mechanism behind it. So if we lower that and potentially reduce that, then that's going to help us. So we do that by removing, the amount of processed meat. What we need to understand is that yes, we add fiber in, but if we can switch to less processed meat as well as doing that, then that's the kind of the key thing. But we can also create carcinogens by the way that we cook meat. Okay, so if you're really charring stuff, like high temperatures, or potentially even using high amounts of oil to cook things, and these types of things as well can be a factor in terms of increasing it. So we want to potentially kind of look at that as well, as something that we can reduce.
That's one thing you hear a lot about red meat, is that the
Yeah,
heterocyclic amines are caused by basically like the burning of meat. So if
yeah,
you're cooking a steak, unfortunately, that tasty crisp on the outside is worse for you than
yeah,
low and slow
yeah.
cooking.
Yeah, exactly. Low and slow, and like you say, baking things, and like you say, not. I mean, I don't advocate eating raw meat, but these types of things are more beneficial if you can reduce the amount of consumption that you do across the week. Then that'll be beneficial.
Out of interest, why don't you advocate raw meat? What is it, just because of
No,
food causative
I do
risk, or
advocate raw meat. I do, but it's just a practicality issue.
okay?
Like I, I mean, I don't know how many people regularly kind of like make steak tartare, or for their kind of lunch, or whatever. But I do think that eating it slightly, like you say, not charred to within an inch of its life, and I think that's definitely something that we need to
Medium
be
rare.
aware of. Yeah, medium rare, or just like say the cooking method. Like
Yeah.
say low and slow, and maybe more stews and more kind of slow cooking, and these types of things are a better, more that they are a better method of cooking. Um, Again, just reducing that intake of like say PAH, HCA, and other compounds.
I think what that kind of also refers to as well is if you're doing the slow cooking, it means you need to be more prepared. You need to actually be conscious about what you're eating, not just grabbing what's easy, what's quick. And again, those type of health decisions, those dietary decisions, are normally then going to also show within other decisions in your life as well that go beyond just your diet. Which then, when we talk about the mortality risks, you're probably doing other things because you're grabbing this quickly or doing that, or your stress levels are high, and there's so many other factors that are adding in. Whereas if you're someone that says, right, I'm going to slow cook my meat for tonight in the crock pot, I'm going to have this really nice meal, I've already prepared my lunch, and I'm going to have some like raw salmon and whatever, nice like eggs and bacon for breakfast. All right, you've got a nice like diverse bit of food there, a little bit of process at the start, nothing at the end, and do you know what I mean? So that is probably quite a balanced like daily intake, because you're thinking about it and not just picking the quick and easy thing.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's that. I
No,
was
go on,
just going to
Rash.
say it's that correlation with an overall healthy lifestyle, isn't it? That those
Definitely.
studies basically, if somebody's healthy, they live longer. That's almost like the high level conclusion. So if they are well prepared and they, have thought about their food in advance, like Rob says, then they're probably a healthy, organized person generally. But if they're grabbing a McDonald's meal in a rush at the train station, they're unlikely to be organized and healthy in other areas of their life as well.
Yeah, definitely. And we're talking about CVD risk, like cardiovascular disease risk, and all of these types of things. And exercise is the number one thing you do, like to help lower this. Like it's insane. It's the magic pill. It really is. Like if you look at the research, like so. But again, people that are more conscious of their diet, eat less processed meat, eat more fiber, are more likely to exercise. So again, it kind of all comes back round. So yeah,
Everything's everything. So
yeah,
one thing we touched on earlier that I'd like to dig a bit deeper into was why some people feel better on and off meat. Like a classic story you tell, it's almost the opposite of Rob's wife and father-in-law's, that they stop eating meat and then all of a sudden their skin gets better or their digestion improves. Why might that happen, and why can it happen in both ways?
yeah. I think we touched on it earlier about the quality of meat.
Mm-hmm.
I think that has a huge impact. So when people remove meat and potentially feel better, they might be choosing, I don't know, more processed meats, like some more mince and more sausages and more bacon, rather than their diet being built around organic, free range chicken and high quality red meat. So they remove that, and that removes the nitrates, it removes the carcinogens, it removes the inflammatory compounds that come alongside eating that type of food. So then they have to replace it with something. Now, if they replace it with the correct things, then they've got a double whammy. They've got, two birds with one stone there. But the number one thing is that they're removing these inflammatory compounds that are not, contributing to their health. So they naturally feel better. I think then it can be like, well, how long do they feel better for? Like, do they then start to feel low on energy? Do they, because they have lack of iron? Do they start to feel, that they're missing certain things? So certain deficiencies, certain symptoms, tiredness, etc. Then they can add things back in, such as, Rob's father-in-law started to kind of feel better once he added it back in. So people feeling better when they add it back in, I think it's potentially helping them to treat deficiencies, eating more protein, getting more amino acids. And remember, amino acids have a huge impact in the body and beyond muscle building. It's neurotransmitter production, immune function, detoxification. We need it for phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification in the liver. So having a broad spectrum amino acid intake, which is adequate, is really going to help overall health and well-being. Plus we're getting iron, plus we're getting vitamin A, vitamin E, omega-3s, like B12, B vitamins. So there's a natural increase in things that are going to help our energy levels. So when people add meat in, this can be something that helps. Often we find that it's from protein source as well. Like we add, people get protein in generally, regardless of where it comes from, that they start to feel a little bit better. Obviously there's a limit, but I think that's where meat can be very beneficial, because like we said, it's very nutrient dense if you get good quality, and that becomes across the board. Like white meat, red meat has slightly higher B vitamins, slightly higher creatine, slightly higher iron and zinc, but white meat still has, like I say, full spectrum amino acids, and still has a lot of benefits beyond just protein.
Something that I started to do, I've done now for quite a while, is I buy less meat but higher quality. So I still spend the same sort of amount, but I try and always then buy the organic this or the free range that, which I've always done anyway. But it's I've made sure. So then when a possible argument of I can't afford it comes in, well, I just eat less, because I was always a bit funny when, like, we've used like meal prep services like Gusto and stuff like that before. I'm like, the protein portions are so small. I'm like, this is just mine. I'm like, and it's supposed to feed. And even Hannah's like, this isn't enough, and I'm just like,
we stopped it as well, mate.
It's great, because I think for us it's just like, it's a nice easy way for like different recipes, different things, and again getting quite good with different like vegetables and stuff like that, so getting diverse foods in there. But the protein amount, and I don't know about the quality, because I can't attest to that, but that's the only stuff I can't mention. But when it comes outside of that, I try to aim for those higher quality meats. So then again, I'm trying to make sure they're gone through less of a process. And if I am buying bacon, which I do, I buy nitrate-free bacon and stuff. I'm trying to make those decisions, because I love bacon, and I then don't char it. I air fry it to the point again. So I'm trying to mitigate the things that cause an issue, but still get the goodness of bacon and sausages, because I love bacon and sausages.
Yeah, I think you're right there, buddy. Like, I think a lot of people are being more aware of buying less, buying better quality. The issue is that we need to educate people on what to replace it with across the week when they don't have meat. So what things can you replace it? You can't replace it with donuts. You can't replace it with pizza. Do you know what I mean? Like, so people struggle. They struggle with the education and the understanding of, okay, well, I'm not going to eat chicken because it's meat and two veg, or it's stir fry, or it's this. What do I add in that's alternative? Oh, I'll just buy a Beyond Meat burger. Okay, well, cool. Like, we need to educate people on trying to find alternative solutions, such as using beans and pulses, which, again, if people are going, well, it's going to cost me more money to buy, that's £9 for 2 chicken breasts compared to, like, I can go on this and get 5 kilos for 9 quid. Well, everybody can afford black beans. Everyone can afford pulses. Like, these are really cheap, so these types of things, if you're mixing it through your stir fries, your rices, your stews, again, buying bigger cuts of meat and slow cooking them, cheaper, more affordable way to do things. So it is about buying better quality. And I think it's just about that education of trying to derive protein from alternative sources and derive and understand that if you need to make sure that you're replacing B vitamins, zinc, iron, these types of things that you're going to miss out if you do potentially lower your intake of meat. That's the key thing, and that's where people miss it, and then they'll just go back to eating a load of meat every day.
I think that's it. It's almost like that second layer of understanding. But so going back to the question of, like, why do people feel better sometimes when they go off meat, and why do they feel better when they go back on meat or start eating meat? And it's actually not the meat or not, it's the underlying nutrients they are getting when they feel better, or the toxins, let's say, that they're removing when they feel better again. So we're almost oversimplifying the question of, like, it's not because it's meat or not, it's because of the shit that's in whatever you were eating is removed, and the goodness that you're adding in is coming in, whether it's from meat or not.
Yeah, people always say to me, like, when they've been on a plan or something, they'll be like, you ruined pizza, or you ruined like treat night for me, because I used to be all right and now I feel horrendous after I eat all this. I'm like, no. Like, you just felt horrendous all of the time,
And you was comfortable with that.
and now you feel a lot better. Like, now you're going back to that. That's what you used to feel like all the time. So I didn't ruin it. I just showed you that there's a better way.
Showed you the light.
It showed you the light. But yeah, you're right. Like, it is removing these types of things. But we got to, like, when people go to me about, like, supplementation, I'm like, the best supplement or nutrient that you can take is the one that you're deficient in. It's going to help you to bring in any deficiency up to a relatively, good level or optimal level. And, potentially when people add meat in or add a certain kind of thing in, if it's got nutrients they're deficient in or their body requires, then they're going to feel better. So, yeah.
What I think would be interesting as well, because you mentioned there about knowing what you're deficient in, and obviously getting blood work done and stuff like that is a really key thing to kind of understand that. And I know, for instance, way back, I think this was before the pandemic in January. So I tried a month of trying vegan / plant-based, and a lot of that was stemmed from, I had an underactive thyroid, which you mentioned to me. You said, right, you should probably try and get some more things with iodine in, so like jackfruit and stuff like that. And that month actually showed me so much more, because I was very much single-minded, like, you must, like, meat. And then when I had a month of eating like vegan, like plant-based, it gave me a much better understanding of the benefits of plants and stuff like that, and adding them in. But I was very quick to bring that meat straight back in. But since then, I have kept a lot more vegetables. I've kept in jackfruit on not a regular basis, but every, like, once a month. I've kept these, and it's also made me see, because, like, just using that as an example of iodine, like, what meat can you get that in? Because I don't know this.
Good question. I don't think you can.
Seafoods.
Is it just in seafood? So, because this is the thing. So then, if I'm lacking that, and it then improved my thyroid function, so without then having the vegetable to improve my thyroid function, I would have then still potentially had an underactive thyroid, which wouldn't have then been addressed, because I just would have been eating the same. But the blood work then told me what I was deficient in, which I guess, which kind of the reason why I went off on that little tangent is because the deficiency is the key part, because most people just jump into a diet thinking, right, this is going to be the key to make me feel better. Just like we've kind of been alluding to this whole episode, isn't just like, going down one way, going down the other way, you eliminate whatever and you feel better. And then you start to feel worse because you're lacking something. So having data is a key thing to give you an understanding of what you need to do to improve your current state.
Yeah, that look. This is the practical application of what we're talking about here. So you've got some blood work done. You're deficient in something. Okay, if you didn't know that and you went to a plant-based diet, you would have felt better potentially, because you'd have included maybe more foods that include, the compounds that are going to help your thyroid function. Okay, you'd have gone, oh, plant-based diet, really good. I felt better on it. Whereas if you'd kept your normal diet and added in iodine-rich foods and other nutrients, you would have felt better as well. So then you would have been like, you wouldn't have been demonizing meat, going, "Oh, meat's bad. I feel
Me
horrendous."
and my plaque, no meat, no
But
meat.
yeah. So therefore, that's what we need to apply this to this scenario, and hopefully that's what we're trying to do here, is to just, like say, make it a bit more practical rather than demonizing certain foods or for food groups, and like I say, making it real world. So that was how I would approach it with you, Rob.
Yeah, and
Rather than going
one of the reasons why I wanted to bring that up is because I would love to kind of get a bit of a discussion on blood work with yourself, because I've done it in my part, I've done it in the past, and I know Ash has, and we've used different companies, and I don't think many people know how easy it is to do it yourself, and how just that simple process, and why it's important to not just have it as the once being a snapshot, and actually taking it, take it at regular intervals to get a better picture of what's going on. When would you say is an appropriate time for someone to maybe take some blood work? Should everyone do it? And would you recommend doing it frequently, or what would be your suggestion there?
Very good question. When's the best time? If you've never had it done, do it now, because you want to have a look at what's under the hood. What we would then do is look at that and go, okay, food first approach. What can we add in? Okay, so if you're deficient in zinc and B vitamins, cool, we can add these in. Doesn't always need to be red meat, but it could be, because it has high levels of that. Could be beans, could be seeds, could be more seafood, so we would have a food first approach. If you're very deficient in something, that's when a supplementation protocol can be useful. So supplements can help treat a deficiency quicker than adding a food in. Then you might want to maintain it with food. But rather than, like say, trial and error of diets or trial and error of certain supplements, just because Holland Barrett got a 2-for-1 offer on, like it's streamlining things straight away to know what works for you, what you need. Yeah. So again, it would be like, can I make an addition to my diet? Can I make a restriction from my diet? That's going to help me to feel better straight away. Now, when you said about doing regular blood work, that is the key. So we're looking at trends, and I want to know, is it trending up? Is it trending down? What's going on? So we look at cholesterol, for an example. You took your blood work and you say, okay, I'm 4.8 on my cholesterol, total cholesterol. Okay, everything else is in the green. Okay, cool. Maybe you don't get cholesterol done for another 3 years because you're like, I'm good. But that's trending up. Okay, you've only got then 0.3 or whatever to go into a risk. Your levels are going to be at risk. What happens then if you're actually trending up relatively quickly? In 6 months' time, it could be 5.3. In 1 year's time, it could be 6. So we want to be, can we put in a prevention strategy to help you? And you can't do that without regular blood work. Now, I'm thinking every 3 months, even twice a year, you could do it. Okay. The blood work that is now available is really great. We use Omnos, but there's Thriver, there's Medichecks, there's other companies that you can do, and it's all at home now. And the panels that you can get are fantastic.
Yeah.
You can look at omega ratios, you can look at zinc, you can look at hormones, you can look at vitamin D. One thing on that is, for me, I would always get a nutrient panel first before a hormone panel. So you want to look at what you're deficient in, where there's imbalances, full blood count, rather than going, what's my testosterone, what's my estrogen, what's my progesterone, okay? Because you can look at that data, but then you might be like, oh, my testosterone's low, Liam, and my free testosterone's really low as well, and whatever. And I'm like, okay, we need to look at maybe have you got any nutritional deficiencies? Are you deficient in zinc? Are you deficient in vitamin D? Are you deficient in nutrients that are going to help you to
Yeah.
produce testosterone? Is your cholesterol levels very, very low? So we want to look at that first, then get your hormone profile done.
Because it's the
So
fuel that helps with the hormones, right? So you're putting stuff into you
exactly.
to create the hormones, to create everything, or not create certain things. So I guess if you're not putting that food in, that's why that nutrient profile is so key.
Yeah, I would do that, and it's really cheap. Like honestly, and I say really cheap. Yeah, you're looking at £100 to £160, and I'm like, look, if we think of what we spend that much money on every month, the investment in your health is brilliant
Yeah.
for what you get, and I would just say it's going to probably save you in the long run on supplements that you're spending money on. I mean, everybody's got to cover the supplements. Look at how much that costs you. It's probably going to be more than £169.
Yeah.
So go and get some blood work done. Streamline your food choices. Streamline your supplementation, and do it on a regular basis. That would be a game changer for you.
Pun intended. Quick question, for just a common question you get about meat, about is it bad for digestion? And
Yeah, I
yeah,
think
we've got that.
we kind of touched on that, didn't we? Like it's again, it's dose dependent for me. Volume is the key. Okay, so protein has a very high thermic effect. It's very challenging. It's hard to digest. Takes time. Okay, we also very rarely eat meat by itself. So if we ate a 300-gram steak, we're probably eating it with cream, spinach, and triple cooked chips, and and a few beers.
Yeah.
And you think that. And if you think mince, we're probably eating it with wrapped in a lovely burrito with a load of rice and a load of cheese and sour cream. And it's so protein. I think sometimes can be like, I've got the meat sweats, and it's actually probably a combination of different things. So I don't think protein is bad for digestion. I think excessive protein with excessive extras, that's where people I think can have digestive issues.
Perfectly leads to my next question. What's an appropriate amount of meat to eat? If the ethical stuff's off the table, what's too much? What's just right?
Again, Ash, we're going to come right back to what I started on in context. And look, individual for you, how much protein, how much meat is too bad, how much meat is good for you. Like it's very individual. Like if you're talking about a 50-kilo, guy compared to a 90-kilo guy, it's completely different. We're looking at someone, a woman that trains 6 times a week, but compared to a woman
Sure.
that doesn't train, it's really hard. That individual tolerance, but there's a minimum level of protein that you want to be taking in. The RDA that's put out there is probably a little bit low. I think it's about 0.8 grams per kilo per body weight, and I think that's a little bit low. A lot of the research out there now is a minimum of about 1.2 grams per kilo per body weight is a good baseline, and then that maybe increases depending on activity levels, depending on muscle mass, depending on your goal of maybe putting on a little bit of muscle mass. So you want to be kind of going up to around 2 kilos, maybe 2.2, as a kind of top end, and then deriving that down from, breaking that down into how much meat should you be eating. There isn't an answer, so I'm not going to hang my hat on it. So people can comment and go, "He told me to eat this much," or to remove that. It's an individual thing, and nutrition is N=1. So some people might feel better on a higher meat diet. If you're doing a higher meat diet, you really have to focus on the quality. That would be my big point on that. The less meat you eat, and I'm saying that you can eat rubbish, but obviously it's a volume thing. So if you obviously then you have a better opportunity to eat quality meat because you're not buying as much. But if the more you eat, you really need to focus on quality. I think practical application of it, I think red meat should be, I don't know, 3, maybe 4 times a week. I think good quality. I think that allows you then to use, if you're a meat eater, if you're non-plant based, it allows you to have opportunities to eat white meat, opportunities to eat seafood, opportunities to eat plant-based proteins, and have a varied intake across the week. That would be what I would kind of approach. And if you can kind of split your week in terms of how many meals you eat, and then try to segment that into terms of red meat and white meat and different types of red meat and different types of white meat and different types of fish and seafood and beans and pulses and, dairy, that's what I would approach it from, in terms of having a bit more balance. So rather than saying I need to eat this much, that's what I would do in terms of a practical approach.
Yeah. You've touched on something I've heard you speak about before, which is varying your protein sources and the benefit of doing that, sort of cycling the protein sources, and you've touched on it there. Could you go into a little bit more detail, please, on why that's so beneficial? Why eating, like, the classic bodybuilder, they only eat chicken breast as their protein source. Why might that be holding back their progress as compared to cycling through sometimes red meat, sometimes fish, sometimes pulses, sometimes eggs, that sort of thing?
Yeah, it comes down to nutrient availability. It comes down to look, it's not bad to eat a very similar thing every day. Maybe they would have to supplement their diet from elsewhere. I think cycling your protein intake allows you to feel what you feel better on. So if you go, I felt better on meat, I felt better on seafood, I felt better on this on that day, then you can maybe increase that and decrease the ones that you don't feel good on, and that allows you to find what works for you. If we just eat the same thing, again, going back to that guy that said I've ruined pizza night for him, you just accept being potentially suboptimal. I think that varying your protein sources allows you to derive different nutrients from it. So like I said, red meat has higher levels of creatine and carnitine and choline compared to white meat. Seafood has higher levels of iodine and, different zinc and magnesium compared to turkey breast. Turkey has higher levels of tryptophan and, other things that are going to help you to get a really nice balanced diet. So that's why I would like to vary people's protein intake. And then start to prioritize it for them. So do you feel really good having eggs? Cool. We're going to have that, 4 or 5 times a week, rather than more like, I feel, yogurt in the morning is a better protein source for me, but you've never had eggs in the morning. So let's trial that and see how you get on. But we know from a nutrient point of view, without having to get blood work done all the time, I know if you vary it, you're going to be boxing off a lot of different nutrients. So from my point of view, it's a safety thing to be like, I know that you're going to get a nice broad spectrum of vitamins and minerals and different nutrients.
That's also why, obviously, you're a massive pro for eating the rainbow, the 5 color challenge and stuff like that. Getting the different diversity of vegetables and plants, and it's just it carries over to the meat, just like you said there. And it's like that's why, like, for instance, I know if we're a bit stuck for food and we've gone to say M&S, it's like, what we're going to get for food. And we go to, say, the stir fry section, I'll always get the most colourful stir fry. I'll get whatever the noodles, and I'll always pick either like the duck or something like that, because I'm like, it's a meat I don't normally eat. So why not get the duck? Because I don't normally buy duck, and then at least I'll get a different type of fat. I'll get a different type of this, and sometimes I bought pork because I don't ever eat like pork steaks. So I was like, again, there's benefits to pork. So I'm like, there's things I'm missing from that. So it's even if I keep it relatively similar, I think, like you said, there's nothing wrong necessarily with keeping it similar, but having diversity just gives you, like, it's basically the real life multivitamin. Like that, you're just ticking your boxes, doing what you need to, and if something is deficient, you can up things, because you'll be noticing when you're feeling a bit ropey or whatever.
100%, mate. 100%. Get the colours in with good quality meat.
I think that's a big takeaway from the whole podcast, is that the benefits of vegetables and the benefits of meat are not mutually exclusive. So actually just having that second layer of understanding as to what in those foods is good for you and what your body needs means you can select where you get it from more deliberately, rather than trying to oversimplify things to think, I should eat more meat or less meat, and that's going to solve all my problems. I think that's the bugbear I have with the meat debate.
Yeah,
and
I agree, mate.
Also, just trying to think about maybe another takeaway for the listeners, and so when they're thinking about what to eat, so when we spoke there about how much is the right amount of meat to eat, when you're designing a plate of food, do you start with the meat and then do you then go to the vegetables and stuff like that, or do you choose the vegetables first and add the meat appropriate with the veg? And the only reason why I ask this is because it's like, I know if I like certain vegetables and certain meats. So if I went the other way around, I'd probably have different types of meats more often because I'm choosing more based around the vegetables. Because then also, again, the type of nutrients I'm going to be getting. So just if someone is trying to now think about how they can diversify, where do they start?
I think for the majority of your week, it should be plant-based first. I think it's easier to top meals or finish meals with other meat or fish or whatever. I think if you can focus on building your meal around, right, what plants have I got in, what colors have I got into that meal, and then using the meat on top of it, I think that's a better way for most people to improve their cooking skills, to improve the nutrient density of their diets. Because I think often people would go the other way at most of the time and go, I've got a piece of meat, what am I going to put with it? I've got a piece of fish, what am I going to put with it? And if we can reverse engineer that, I think that's a better way of increasing people's, the quality of people's diet. Now, I think when you've got, if you bought a really nice piece of meat or a really nice piece of fish, or it's a weekend or it's an event, then I think it goes the other way. For me, I would always try. I don't actually know. It's a good question. And for me, personally, I don't know what I actually do. I think I advise people to always try to build plant-based. So what's the base of your meal? Because I think it's easier to add things on. I don't actually know how I approach it. I just know that I look across the week. I take a bird's eye view more of our diet than rather than the day to day. So I'll look across the week to be like, okay, we've got a couple of days where we got fish. A couple of days. Most of my lunches are plant-based. Most of my lunch, kind of takes care of that. And then in across the week, I'll be like, right, what have we got? Have we got a couple of days where it's fish? Have we got a couple of days where it's red meat? Have we got a couple of days where, in the evenings where it's if it's good quality white meat? And I know that then by the weekend, it's it doesn't matter too much. So if we eat out, I can kind of be a bit more relaxed of whatever. I would take more of a bird's eye view across the week rather than a day to day. And that's a nice thing for people to look at. But look, what I think we need to understand is that when we talk about vegan and vegetarian and pescatarian and carnivore and red meat and whatever, the foundation of this, that carnivore is a separate conversation, but if you can base your diet around plants or plant-based foods, that's going to be beneficial, regardless of how much red meat, of how much fish, of how much this you eat. If you can do that, that's going to be the most beneficial thing, because it doesn't then matter as much if you're eating red meat, white meat, fish, or whatever, because you're getting that fiber in, you're getting other nutrients in, and I think a lot of the time people would get like, oh, I need to eat vegan. And actually, no, you can just eat plant-based, mate, and then just add it on. So, I think that's the better way to approach it, more practical way to approach things for people.
Beautiful, mate.
Perfect. I think we might have to do another episode on the benefits of veg, because that's a whole...
Mate, I would love to do
story.
that.
Yeah.
As Rob said, we wrote a challenge, or a program, 30-day program and challenge called the 5-Color Challenge, and I did it because I was. People come to me and be like, "What's 5 servings a day? Like, is it a couple of bits of lettuce? Is it 4 tomatoes? Is it 400 grams of broccoli? Like, what is it?" So I was like, "Okay, we need to figure something out here," and it's how I eat. Like, that is genuinely how I eat. I try to get different colors of food, and I was like, it's nice. It looks nice. I want to eat it more than beige. And we created it and we ran it, and then it's been incredible. And I probably don't promote it as much, but we run it with the partner gyms and stuff like that. But I've done tons and tons of reading on the benefits of veg.
Be definitely keen, because I've done it. I've done the challenge, and it was great. It was
good
so
for kids and getting them families and stuff as well.
It's also it was great to kind of to make you look for other vegetables than just broccoli, than just whatever your normal standard things. And I'm looking for like the purple. I'm looking for white. I'm looking for I'm like, fuck, it's an effort. But that's what then become fun about it, because you'll then go to not just Sainsbury's, you then go to the Turkish shop and look at their vegetables and look at their options that they have, and it really does open your eyes to so much more. And again, I think a lot of this, just to finish up, it is, if you're willing to make a bit of effort, you get a big return, because that's what convenience is the killer for most people with all of this stuff, because it's the crappy food, it's the crappy choices. And don't get me wrong, I'm one for convenience, and that's definitely shown in other things, but that's why. And I've always known whenever I'm being a little bit more conscious, you just feel the benefits. And I think that's a lot of what this kind of boils down to. So thank you very much, mate. Really appreciate your time.
Oh, lads, it was fantastic. And yeah, look forward to potentially coming on back in the future and talking all things veggies and fruit and color. That'd be superb. But yeah, hopefully people took away some good things from this. And as you said, anything that people want, research studies and everything will pop across. But feel free to message me, and I can point you into the direction of some of the stuff that we spoke about today.
Could you remind us of your contacts and socials, please?
Best way to contact me, mate, is Instagram, or just go onto the website. So at ph_nutrition, or just go to phnutrition.co.uk. And yeah, lots of information on there, loads of different recipes, loads of free resources. And yeah, just if you've got any questions, then pop the contact and email me any questions, and I'll get back to you.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much for your time, mate. It's been great chatting again.
Pleasure, lad.
We'll speak to you soon.
Thank you, Liam, for coming on. As always, an absolute banger of an episode. Always enjoy digging deep into the world of nutrition, especially about a topic something like this, where I'm more fascinated about the studies going on in 10, 20 years time, just like we mentioned there, especially with all these meat substitutes coming onto the market. And I think it was really clear how we don't really often get to discuss all the benefits of meat. And I think one of the key takeaways from today's episode was, yes, how much meat you're eating is important, but also the quality of the meat that you're eating, and trying to stay as close to nature as possible, staying away from as much processed stuff. And if you do have processed stuff, like myself, like I enjoy my bacon and my sausages, I do try and go with like the nitrate frees, the high quality stuff, and also then try and think about how I'm cooking it. So it really is important. And I think something that really made me think about is that blood work stuff. You know, don't just change your diet and expect a change. Get a bit of an insight of what's going on under the hood, and then see what you actually need to change. You don't need to take away everything or add everything. So, as always, thank you very much for your time. We really hope you enjoyed today's episode. All the information will be in the show notes down below, all the links to all the studies and stuff that Liam will send across. Thank you very much for your time. If you'd like to leave us a review, you can head over to iTunes or Apple Podcasts, leave us a review there. Or if you want to support the podcast, head over to YouTube and subscribe. Thank you very much as always, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.